Hello, and welcome to the Biodiesel Magazine podcast. My name is Danielle Pekarski, and I am joined by our host, Anna Simet, editor of Biodiesel Magazine, as well as our guest for today, Donnell Rehagen, CEO of the Clean Fuels Alliance America. Donnell has served as the CFAA CEO since 2016 and joined the organization in 2004 as the Chief Operating Officer. Welcome, Donnell.
Well, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Donnell. Thanks so much for joining us today. You are actually Biodiesel Magazine's very first podcast guest, so there's a little clout behind there. I think maybe let's just jump into one of the main questions that I have is, at the beginning of the year, the National Biodiesel Board transitioned its name to the Clean Fuels Alliance America. So let's just start today. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about your organization and then kind of what led to this change making sense with the trajectory of the bio-based diesel industry?
Yeah, sure. Our trade association has been around since 1992, and it was actually originally formed then as the National Soy Diesel Development Board. And it was formed out of a cooperative of state soybean associations who wanted to try to develop a new market for soybean oil, which was kind of the depressing part of their production. It was not the most valuable part, the oil. And so originally we were the National Soy Diesel Development Board, but then just 2 years later in 1994, they changed their name to the National Biodiesel Board, understanding that for an industry to grow, a biomass-based diesel industry to grow, it was going to take all kinds of stocks, not just soybean oil. So we were the National Biodiesel Board from 1994 until just this last spring, and so we became Clean Fuels Alliance America. We changed that name as a reflection of the changing of the biomass-based diesel industry. So for the first couple of decades, there was really only one fuel in the space, and it was biodiesel. But over the last 8 to 10 years, we've seen that space change, and so now we have renewable diesel as well as sustainable aviation fuel, all kind of utilizing the same feedstocks. And so we as a trade association want to represent all three of those fuels in this biomass-based diesel space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And how many members do you have right now?
Our members are companies, and so we have about 120 member companies. Many of them are biodiesel producers, renewable diesel producers. We still have a significant number of soybean associations that have maintained their role in our industry and in our trade association. And then organizations that support either agriculture or renewable fuels. So about 120 companies.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think let's move on to some updates from you guys. What can you tell our listeners? What are the major priorities right now that you are working on?
Yeah, our industry is driven very, very greatly by policy, federal policy, state policy increasingly, but then also now corporate policy. Those corporate policies trying to drive down carbon use in their operations are having a very positive impact on demand for our fuels. So from our standpoint, at the federal level, the renewable fuel standard, that foundational piece that kind of annually sets a volume demand for our industry. And so that policy has been in place for over a dozen years, and so we continue to work with the EPA to grow the volumes that are demanded by that policy. And at the state level, the low carbon fuel standard in California is the driving force. Our industry supplies over 1 billion gallons of biomass-based diesel into California annually. That's about a third of their on-road use, so there's a lot of our fuel in California. So low carbon fuel standard policies kind of up and down the West Coast are pulling a lot of fuel there, and then the heating oil industry on the East Coast is emerging as a growing market as they look to decarbonize there as well. So my kind of common theme there, right, among the state side is lowering carbon, and so we're working in those spaces as well.
Let's dig in just a little bit further on the RFS. Our online news reporter, Aaron Vogeley, just ran a story last night, and it said that the EPA has agreed to release the proposed 2023 RVO numbers in November. So do you have any comment on that, in terms of what you're hoping for and expecting? And I also saw that recently a group of 25 senators sent a letter to EPA, urging them to set strong RVOs for biomass-based diesel for 23 and 24.
Yeah, 23 is a unique year in the RFS. I mentioned that RFS has been around for over a dozen years, but it's a unique time for the EPA to have a lot more regulatory authority over the volumes that they set, particularly on the ethanol side, but also on the biomass-based diesel side. So as we look at our industry and we see a lot of renewable diesel likely coming online in the next 12 months to 18 months, we're wanting to make sure the EPA sees that as we do. And takes that into account as they maybe for the first time are able to set a multi-year RVOs versus an annual. So that's the one thing that's changing this year. I want to make sure the EPA is plugged into what we see our industry doing over the next several years, not just what it's doing at the current moment.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, kind of on that note of policy, can you give us an update on the biodiesel tax credit?
Yeah, the tax credit has been in place for our industry since 2005, and it's truly been another one of those foundational pieces that changed the economics of biodiesel production. It's been on and off. Congress has allowed it to lapse over periods of time. It provides some certainty, and so it's going to lapse again at the end of 2022, so here in a few months. And so we've been working very hard with our champions to see an opportunity legislatively to get that extended. It's a little uncertain at the moment exactly what's going to happen as far as what would carry an opportunity like that for us. So we're just going to continue to work and continue to share the message about the certainty that tax credit provides for our industry, allowing our industry to continue to grow.
Right. And just kind of a comment here. I was reading some material on your website, and it had said that U.S. biodiesel and renewable diesel has reduced fuel prices at the pump by 4%. Doesn't seem like much, but then when you do the math, that equates to about 22 cents per gallon, which is pretty significant.
It is significant, and I'm glad you caught that, because anybody that gets hung up on 4% probably thinks, well, that's not that big of a deal. But with $5 diesel fuel, it is a big deal. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of our fuel going into California and low carbon markets on top of it. So not only are we reducing the price for consumers at the pump, but we're providing a cleaner product on top of it. So it's just a wonderful story our industry has created for the consumers here in the United States, giving them choices to use cleaner fuels and save a few pennies at the pump.
Absolutely. I think that's probably a good segue into my next question. If you go onto the Clean Fuels Alliance America website, you'll find the Trinity Health Impact Study. Recently, you released phase 2 results of that, calling it a groundbreaking study on the air quality benefits of biodiesel. Could you tell us a little bit more about that study?
Yeah, we've talked already this morning a lot about the carbon benefits, the environmental benefits, the climate benefits of cleaner fuels like ours. We wanted to look at what also does that mean from a human health standpoint. And so we enlisted the help of the folks at Trinity Consulting, who are very deep in this kind of evaluation, and took a look at what would happen if we transform the use of petroleum diesel in certain locations to biodiesel. So if we replaced all the petroleum diesel with biodiesel, we looked at places, locations that were, had significant transportation hubs, ports, rail transfer yards, and things like that. So communities that had those functions, located within them. And so what the study found was there were significant health benefits as far as reducing cases of asthma, reducing lost work days, some cancer avoidance, and all of that with the help of Trinity was monetized as well. So not only did the Trinity study show the positive benefit on human health, but it also showed what the cost savings would be of people not having to incur the negative side of that. We're very excited about that, and we've taken on a couple of subsequent studies of Trinity to look at other locations around the country. We're up to about 40 different cities and municipalities that we've studied, and so that information is available on our website. It's pretty exciting stuff for us.
Absolutely. So before we move on to our final question, Donnell, is there anything else you want the bio-based community to know? Anything you guys are working on, or anything that they should be paying close attention to?
Well, you know what, we talked a little bit about state policy, and any chance I get, I always encourage people to engage with their state legislatures. Increasingly, the states are getting a little impatient with the federal government to do something on a national scale for cleaner fuels, reducing carbon. States are taking those initiatives upon themselves. And so whether you believe there's something going on in your state or not, there is. I can pretty much guarantee there's conversations about this. And so those who are interested in this industry need to be present. And so engage with your state elected officials, your state regulators, find out what the conversations are and plug yourselves into those before you find that maybe your state decides to do something that's really not conducive to the clean fuels industry. So that's the number one thing. I like to see that local engagement at the state level, and then bringing in the national support whenever things are materializing that need some additional insight.
Right. It's critical. So as a final question, Donnell, what do you find to be the most exciting thing right now in this renewable fuel sector? What gets you really fired up?
Yeah, I get excited about, and I mentioned it earlier, about the corporate policy. I mean, federal policy is a cornerstone, state policy is a cornerstone, but increasingly the corporate policies that companies like FedEx or Walmart or Costco are enlisting to drive the carbon use that they have down in their operations is finding what the result of that is they're finding fuels like ours and saying we need to embrace these fuels in our operations. So we're increasingly getting calls, interested parties from the rail and marine industry, and so I think those are huge industries when you look at from a diesel consumption standpoint. So not only are we becoming very prominent in on-road, but now off-road in the form of rail and marine, and then as I mentioned earlier as well, aviation. So there's a lot of emerging market demand, and it's all centered around carbon reduction. And so we've been saying for a long time that's our sweet spot. That's why we're clean fuels. We're going to drive that carbon down, and so we're excited to be seeing these markets, understanding what we've always known and coming to us, seeking our advice and help.
Absolutely. Carbon is the buzzword these days, isn't it?
It sure is. And as I mentioned, it's not just the impact on climate, but it's the impact on human health. And so when you take our fuels and you see what we can do for the environment, for the climate, and for human health, and then, as you mentioned, we're even a little saving people money at the pump. It's a perfect match. We just need to continue to get that message out.
Absolutely. Well, Donnell, I think with that, our job here is done. I want to thank you so much on behalf of Biodiesel Magazine for joining us today. And I want to let our listeners know, be sure to check out the Clean Fuels Alliance America section in Biodiesel Magazine. And to our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks, Donnell.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Until next time.